P.KRG-TV, the 2020 College Bowl season. Since you spent most of our remote classes making your football picks online, I want you to calculate the 250,000 plus NFL playoff scenarios for your final grade due Sunday before the 1 p.m. kickoff. Hi, everyone. This is Will O'Toole welcoming you to a new show and a new year here at Park Ridge Sports History Hour. Actually, 40 minutes, but it makes sense just calling it an hour by the time I get everything going. Anyway, I want to welcome you a happy and healthy 2021, and hopefully we'll be out of this pandemic pronto. But this week, I'd like to spend some time with the college bowl season and the NFL playoffs. And probably by the time this goes to air, the NFL playoff picture will have already presented itself, and all of the possibilities, like I have in that cartoon, would have been spelled out, and there would have been the teams that qualified would be going on to the first round next week. But it is interesting how these mathematicians come up, and I saw the article about the number of possibilities for NFL playoff scenarios, and it's over 250,000. So that's where my cartoon developed for it. And but of course, when I went back to see find the actual number, lo and behold, I couldn't find the particular article that had it. And I'm pretty sure I went to a number of NFL quote unquote football sites. And it was in one of the articles, and it was a mathematician. Of course, you know, they do it in the auspices with the NFL and all the rest of it. But I think it was totaled 261,752 possibilities. So I just made it 250,000 possibilities. And really, when you think about it, you have all those teams in the AFC with 10 plus or 10 wins. And potentially they can all win today and finish with 11 wins. And only one or two of them will qualify for the expanded playoffs this year. In fact, when I was going over it, and I do want to take a quick look at this NFL season before I go to the college. There are in the AFC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 8 teams that have 10 wins already. And of those 8, 1, 2, of course, 3, 4 have qualified. And that means 4 teams are basically going for those 3 spots. And I'm not even going to go into the possibility of if they all win today, because the interesting thing about it is that all 4 of the teams that are vying for those 2 spots in the playoffs or 3 spots in the playoffs, they are all playing opponents that are either out of the playoffs or that they should be able to beat. In other words, they're not meeting head on. So that you could have Kansas City, 14 wins. You could have the Steelers with 13. You could have the Buffalo Bills with 13. You could have the Tennessee Titans with 11. The Indianapolis Colts with 11. The Miami Dolphins with 11. The Baltimore Ravens with 11, the Cleveland Browns with 11, and only 1, 2, 3, only 7 of those teams will make the playoffs, because this year the first place team, which is going to be Kansas City, really Pittsburgh, really took a hit over the last 3 weeks, losing all those games when they could have locked up the number 1 seed and gotten a week off. But Kansas City is going to be the number 1 seed, so you're going to have 6 teams playing for those additional to move on to those 3 spots, and then you'll have your final 4 in the AFC, and likewise in the NFC, you'll have the same thing. Now, with the 250,000 possibilities, I'm not even going into it because, again, when I was doing the cartoon, what was incredible to me is I felt like I needed a lawyer just to read the ergos and the therefores and the whatuzis and all the rest of it. If this happens, but if this happens, and if this happens, because what could really be thrown a wrench into the whole thing is if these teams tie. And I don't even want to begin to say that if all these teams tied, how crazy it would be, because it's not even necessarily, okay, you can go to the week before and say, all right, who would have qualified the week before and throw out the ties. No, the ties in this case have as much an importance as either a win or a loss, obviously. And for the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC East, the tie probably cost them even a potential of getting into, at least this week, into the playoff elimination in the NFC East. Their tie really killed them, because if they had won, we're talking maybe a different scenario for the Eagles. But we're going to save the NFC East for a second and just concentrate on the AFC. And of course, as I stated, this will all be solved. I'm just bringing up the fun part of this. And really, when you think about it, even though it's not a pennant race per se, if you thought of this, if this is week 16, multiply that by 10. This is week 160. And basically, when you think about it, you have 4 teams trying to get into the playoffs. They all are even in terms of games behind. And now, really what you're looking for is the guys who get to win number 101 are going to go on to the playoffs. That's, people don't realize you lose a game in the NFC or in the AFC. It's like losing 10 games in baseball. Just think of it. It almost is perfect. 16 weeks times 10, that's 160, plus they throw a doubleheader in there in baseball. But really, that's how phenomenal the play has been when you think about it in the AFC, and how putrid it really has been in the NFC. And of course, that it goes in cycles. But for right now, it seems that all of the good teams are in the AFC, and we're not even talking about the team for the last decade plus, and that's the New England Patriots, who have been eliminated. And I was hoping they could find their way into this, but there was no way a couple of weeks ago that they were going to win 10 games. I think the best they could have done at that point was go 9-7. And of course, I guess you are now seeing potentially in New England, you're seeing maybe this is the destruction of a once great dynasty in the AFC. And if they hit rock bottom and can rebound real quick, they'll be back into it. But here's the problem, and this goes with the NBA as well as football. When you're mired in that kind of fluctuation between 7-9 and 9-7 and 8-8, when you're mired in that kind of mediocre realm, yeah, you might make the playoffs, but you're not good enough, let's say, to make the Super Bowl or even win. Yes, I know. Let's stop. There have been teams that have gone on to the Super Bowl with only 9 wins. I know that. But generally speaking, you're kind of mired. And with each passing season of staying in there, it kind of, in a lot of ways, it knocks you back by being so average. You're almost better off going, if you want to make it to the top, just go right to the bottom. I mean, look at what Dallas did years ago. They bottomed out, 1 win, 15 losses, and then within 2 or 3 years of that, they're going to the Super Bowl and winning 3 championships with Switzer and Jimmy Johnson. And then, of course, they bottomed out again to a certain – well, they haven't really totally bottomed out. And that's why you're seeing a very mediocre Cowboy team. I mean, witness the fact that they have, 5 wins this year, and they're in the playoff hunt. But that's just a case of just the division just being totally, totally terrible. And look, that maybe my theory works in a certain way, because I know there are fans out there of the Jets who will be saying, well, what about the Jets? But really, when you think about it, the Jets were kind of and have been mired in that 8-8, 9-7 and 7-9 kind of thing. They've been putrid for the last couple of years, and they, if you talk to their fans, they couldn't even do it right by losing all the games this year, so they would be the number one pick in the NFL. Sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes by winning a few games, it does help you in the long run. But Jet fans, what else do they have but for their team to just tank so they get their so they can grab Trevor Lawrence in the 2021 draft. Sometimes it's really being stuck in that middle. Really, you can't fight your way to the top. And it seems that, and I've given you two cases where the teams that have bottomed out real quickly and can restock their franchise, have some lean years and then move on. They get right back into contention, not playoffs. Because now you've seen 7 of the 16 teams in each league make the playoffs. Basically, it's 50% of the team. Now, I'm not talking about making the playoffs. And it's great that you can make the playoffs. But let's face it, as I stated, if you're 9-7 every year, more than likely you'll be 8-8, and then 7-9, and then back to 9-7. Because there's not really that much of a difference. If you take a look at the differential and then divide that by 16, usually teams win and lose by a margin of 7 points or fewer. So really, touchdowns just separate the good from the bad teams in the NFL. Just goes to show you how really equal the talent is. And really, it's one play, one call, one fumble, one interception, one made field goal, and all the rest of it. In fact, when I talked today about Floyd Little, who just passed, you'll see how one guy's career can really be hurt or helped by playing for a mediocre team or a good team. Speaking of which, mediocre, this brings me to my other cartoon, and it does have to do, well, let's do this first. Let's talk about the possibilities for Cleveland getting in. They did unfortunately have to close down their training camp. The reason why I'm picking on Cleveland, I have really turned into a Cleveland fan, not of maybe this particular group, probably of the team way back in the 80s that lost those 2 games so tragically to the Denver Broncos. One in Mile High with the fumble, and I'm not going to mention the running back's name, although I'm pretty sure it was Ernest Biner who fumbled the ball pretty much at the goal line. And then, of course, the drive for John Elway in the mistake by the lake. And, of course, it even goes back a little bit farther than that, back to 1980 when Brian Sipe threw the interception against the Oakland Raiders in the 80 championship game. I remember that game so well because I was listening to it on the radio. Freezing. I worked in a gas station during my college years. Great experience. Had a lot of fun. But on that particular day, it was not fun. It was about 3 below zero outside with a wind chill of about 30 below. And I can remember my brother who worked there with me for a while, he had a wind chill chart. And the wind chill chart, he would show you when the temperature is this and the wind chill is like 10, 15 miles an hour, what the temperature feels like. And believe me, it was never a warm chill factor. Believe me, it was never a warm chill factor. And I just remember that when the winds whipped about 60 miles an hour, and the temperature was about 5 degrees. It felt like it was about 70 below zero. So you're walking out of there with frostbite each night. Anyway, I remember listening to that game on the radio and coming in for bits and moments between customers and all the rest of it. Cold day. And I remember listening to the interception in the end zone by the Oakland Raiders. And of course, the first thing in everyone's mind, if you're a Cleveland fan, is why don't you just kick the field goal? I guess Sam Rutigliano thought he had Johnny Unitas instead of Brian Sipe. And this was not the 80 championship, but the 58 championship. And it was not the Oakland Raiders, but it was the New York Giants on the other side. And of course, everyone recalls there that Unitas just engineered an unbelievable overtime drive against the Giants with the signature touchdown by Alan Amici, formerly of Wisconsin. And the Colts established themselves, and the NFL established themselves as the game to watch on TV, and it became the national game. That's what many sports historians have said about that 58th game at Yankee Stadium between the Giants and the Colts. Well, there have been many classics since then, and I'm not going to get into which one I thought was a better classic or whatever, but to me, and I've been watching the game since the early 70s, late 60s, I've seen great games as well on football. I mean, the game that made Joe Montana into Joe Montana when he beat the Cowboys in the NFC Championship in the 81 season. So that was played in 82, like January 2nd or 3rd, 1982. That's the catch. That was a great game, back and forth. Many of those Cowboy 49er games of the 90s between Montana and Steve Young and Jimmy Johnson squads were classic games. And there have been others. I mean, the 67 Ice Bowl game between the Cowboys and the Green Bay Packers was a classic. People don't realize it. That was a great game played in those unbelievable conditions. So there have been some great games since then. But that, of course, is the landmark game. That's the signature game for the NFL. That's where maybe the evolution of the game as the TV sport and as the grab on the sports public goes or evolves. It is rooted right in that 58 championship game. Anyway, the Giants today, of course, have a shot at the playoffs. I will be rooting for them. I'm not a big Giant fan. I'm rooting for them more for my one reason. My nephews all root for them, so I guess I got to root for them for that reason. But the other reason I want to root for them is that they actually have the worst record of the three teams in the NFC right now, and I would love to see them finish 6-10. And as I've said in past episodes of Park Ridge Sports History, I'd love to see them run the table and win the whole thing and win the Super Bowl with an under 500 record. I don't think there would be a more emblematic, just a better symbol than an under 500 team winning the event television spectacle of 2021, and that, of course, is the Super Bowl. And it would be great if they could take apart the teams that are seen as the coming dynasties, and that, of course, is Kansas City, maybe Buffalo, and in the NFC, maybe the tried and true Green Bay Packers, trying to get one back there one more time in the Aaron Rodgers era. So it should be very interesting. But look, as I said, the real scenarios today, I know that there are other teams that might be vying for spots in the NFC, I believe. But the real thing is the NFC East. And that really brings me to my next cartoon. And it's this. Let me just put on my glasses so I can read. So you and the dog pound are so desperate for Cleveland to make the playoffs that you petition Commissioner Goodall. Yeah, to effectively, immediately move the Browns to the NFC East. And I think that's what the Browns need to do right now, and that is move to the NFC East. As I stated, there are going to be about 4 teams with 10-plus wins, potentially, not make the playoffs. And there's going to be a team in the NFC with 10 losses at least, making the playoffs and having a real shot, because they would potentially, they would also host the first round of the playoffs since they won the division. It's kind of crazy. So it'll be a lot of fun there. Now, it should be a lot of fun. I hope you do enjoy it. The snow earlier this morning was coming down. It really made for a true winter day. And as I say all the time, I make this mention. Look, I go off on tangents. I really don't care because I feel like I'm talking to you as if we're out just conversing about sports and we're just having fun. And one thing leads to another, and you start thinking, oh, yeah, I remember that player or I remember that moment and all the rest of it. So I hope you enjoy it. If you don't, I'm still doing it this way. So I hope you do. Anyway, I'd like to turn to this. And of course, much of this show is devoted to sports history, and in particular, I'm not going to go back to 1896, the Olympics in St. Louis. First of all, no matter what maybe my students might say, I'm not that old. And number two is I think there's just so much information in the last 50, 60 years, particularly in sports. And really, I would actually make this as an argument. Maybe outside of boxing and baseball in the 20s and 30s, probably the most important time period for our major sports has occurred really during my lifetime in the last 60 years. And the reason I say that is, think about it. My buddy and I talk about this quite frequently. We have had the honor and privilege of probably seeing the three greatest centers of all time, right? And maybe you can even make an argument for two other guys, Shaquille O'Neal and maybe Moses Malone. But we saw Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Russell, and Wilt Chamberlain play. Now, albeit we saw Russell and Chamberlain at the very end of their career, but really, we saw Abdul-Jabbar play his whole career. Probably saw the greatest point guard of all time in basketball. Probably the greatest, outside of Russell, probably the greatest Celtic of all time with Larry Bird. And of course, he re-energized along with Magic Johnson the NBA. And of course, that mantle was carried by the greatest player of all time, Michael Jordan. So right there, you're just talking basketball. The number of great, all-time great players that we saw in basketball. Turning to football, wow. I mean, we saw a lot of great football players. I didn't see Jimmy Brown, so I'll leave him out. But I saw the great Steeler dynasties and all those Hall of Famers, the great Cowboy teams of the 70s and then later of the 90s, the 49ers, all these dynasty teams. I didn't really see the Packers, but yes, I saw not the vintage Packers, too young for that, but those guys carried on later on, or I saw the vestiges of some of those great players later on. So I knew who the Packers were. Hockey. I mean, there are many people, and I'm not a big hockey expert, but many of the experts say that probably during this time period, the 60s and 70s, and of course, well into the 80s and 90s, so the three greatest hockey players of all time, Gordie Howe, Bobby Orr, and of course, the great one, Gretzky. And then in baseball, well, we've seen so many great players in baseball. Yeah, maybe we didn't see Ruth and Gehrig. And of course, notice what I say. I know I'm wrong saying this, but even though I'm not a Yankee fan, Gehrig happens to be, if not, he's definitely my favorite Yankee. I think I've stated that before. I just love the consistency with him. But Gehrig and Ruth were probably the two greatest Yankees that I never obviously saw, along with DiMaggio, and I was too young for Mantle. But at least I did see the great Mays late in his career. Aaron, I got to see him break the record. Have to give Bonds his credit. I saw the greatest catcher of all time, my favorite player of all time, Johnny Bench, play. So there have been a number. And listen, even if you want to even think about it this way, the greatest athlete I ever saw in horse racing, Secretariat. And I do recall that year that Secretariat won all those races. So I have been very privileged. And that's why I think football and baseball and basketball, I really think that this is, in a lot of respects, the golden age for these particular sports. They've been able to evolve. Fans love it. You cannot escape the fact that TV and the media, especially television, and now with the various computer and technology, they've really just excelled the popularity of the sports. But I also think this. You can make an argument that the players today are so much better because they've watched these players on TV watch what they do and see if they can improve. I mean, when I was a kid, Billy Johnson was the only guy, and I remember seeing a guy from, let's say, South Dakota State, and it was on college football films. And what he would do is they showed him scoring a touchdown. This is when we had black and white TV sets way back when. And I used to watch this on Sunday morning. And the guy actually did those aerial flips, but he was one. Today, you see these guys hurdling other players. I mean, witness the Alabama game. And it's being done not by, let's say, these 5'8" real kind of like flashes. It's being done by 6'5", 250-pound tight ends, and they're hurtling bodies on a football field in full run, full gallop. It's incredible. And then, of course, the number of times, that famous spin move by either Duper or Clayton. Remember when he got spun by the Jets in that one game and he twirled around? Well, it's being done with such frequency now that play, that's Flintstone age in terms of of football today. I mean, these guys are just acrobats out there. And as a result, the game is just so much faster, so much crisper, and so much more athletic. There's no question about that. And I think it's because players watch other players and see what they do and then improve on that. I mean, in basketball, the dunks, when we were kids, there was two types of dunks. There was the dunk with one hand or the dunk with two hands, and it was done about no farther than about 4 feet away. And then, of course, Dr. J, during I believe it was an all-star game up in Denver, he really jumped, and you'll see this if you ever take a look at YouTube. He jumped from the free throw line all the way to make the dunk. And then kids start imitating that to the point where the dunks are just being done by everybody of any size and height. I mean, Spud Webb, 5'8", wins the dunk contest. That's incredible. So these kids get to see these guys on TV, and they go out, and they really do. I think they do practice. Who wouldn't? I used to practice all the time like that. I just didn't have any athletic ability. So really, we are living in the age of probably at least 3 of the 4 sports, hockey, basketball, and football. And I would say, I would make an argument for baseball as well. There's so many great players today, okay? And you can say all you want. There's so much more strategy in all 3 games. Maybe that so much strategy has kind of taken away the ad lib type of plays that you'll see in football, basketball, or in baseball. All right, I'll give you that argument that, there used to be a lot of razzle dazzle in the NFL, all these kind of trick plays that were a lot of fun, all these counter plays that you see in the 40s, and they've been negated by just strategizing and tape reviewing by the coaches, who can almost see a play before it even starts just by seeing the configuration of, or even not just the configuration of the lineup out there, but the players who are lining up out there. It's pretty incredible talking to these coaches. Anyway, this leads me to my last segue. And that is about, we just had another passing of a great player, a Hall of Fame player who had to fight his way into the Hall of Fame. I didn't realize that. I'm kind of upset with that. But the great Floyd Little. Now, Floyd Little, real quick, he was from Connecticut. He was an All-American at Syracuse. Didn't realize he was a 3-time All-American. That's pretty incredible. He wore the same number as Ernie Davis, their first Heisman Trophy, the first African-American to win the Heisman Trophy, and also Jim Brown, who to this day I still think is probably the quintessential running back in the NFL. I think he still has the highest average for yards per carry, 5.2. There have been guys that have maybe outgained him in a particular season, but you're talking about a guy who did this every year. And I know that there are many fans out there who would say, well, he only played 12, maybe 14 games tops. And he didn't gain 1,000 yards and all the rest of it. But you got to remember that the game was totally different. It was more running than passing then, obviously. So Jim Brown was probably about 70 to 80% of the offense of his team. And he was just a great athlete. And the other thing about the game, I mean, let's be honest, the game it seemed to be played in tougher elements. Jim Brown never played indoors. So that is an argument I'll make about the old-time football. It's something I've always talked about. I love seeing the old Cleveland tapes because they're always muddy, but they're always playing outside. And I think that really has an effect. Now, I know we just had Green Bay play the other night in Green Bay in the snow in late December. I get all that. But for the most part, many of these teams get at least a couple of opportunities during the season to play in quote unquote perfect conditions indoors. All right. So Jim Brown, great player. One thing about football is that you never have just one favorite team, if you ever notice. You usually have a number of teams that you follow or like. And yes, maybe if they come together in a game like a championship game, you do root for one team over the other. I get all that. But as a kid, and you're very impressionable by team colors, exotic names, and football players on other teams always look so much more mythical and more godlike than the players on your own team. But Floyd Little was one of those players for me. First of all, he was number 44 for the Broncos. I liked the fact that the Broncos had unique colors of that orange and blue, and those orange home uniform jerseys really stood out. Now, I never had color TV, but I did have the opportunity, obviously, to collect football cards and all the rest of it. And in fact, I'm going to show you. Here's Floyd Little as we speak. Here's his football card from the late 60s, early 70s. And I can tell you this for a fact. I wish I had it closer. There he is in the blue. If you notice, for the most part, I really do like those jerseys. I do like the uniform. I don't like the uniform of the Broncos now. But if you notice up here, you can tell that the logo is a little bit different. That was from their original year in the league, that Bronco logo up there. And of course, if you notice, they're brown and gold. The original Broncos were so financially strapped that they actually got their uniforms from the University of Wyoming. And they brought those in. So their original colors were brown and gold. And then, of course, they go to orange and blue. And, of course, with the D, I like that D with the Bronco coming out. They had a weird one that looks like a glob of orange. I'll have to show that to you maybe next week. But this one I really liked. I just like the logos that look really cartoonish. I know I'm prejudiced when I say that, but too bad. I just like them. But Floyd Little was a really good player on a mediocre team, to the point where not only were they mediocre, they were terrible. In fact, that year when he was drafted, here's the interesting thing. He gets drafted, played for Syracuse. Remember that Syracuse really had a number of running backs in the 60s. They had some good teams. I'm not going to pronounce the guy's last name. It's I want to say it's Coach Schwartzwalder, but I know I'm wrong saying that. But he was their coach that brought him to the 59 bowls. Jimmy Brown never, I don't think, played in a bowl game. I could be wrong about that. Ernie Davis, of course, does. He played in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. But those late 50s, early 60s Syracuse teams were chock full of really good talent, especially at running back. So Floyd Little was there. Larry Zonka played there. Of course, Jim Brown, and a plethora of other really good running backs with the Syracuse orange. So he went from the orange of Syracuse to the orange crust with Denver, or what would be called the orange crust during the 77 season. The only problem is Floyd Little, first-round draft pick, he goes to a team that he gets them to 6-8 his rookie year. Then they go 7-6-1, 7-5-2, and then it is bottom of the barrel. 5-9, 4-9-1, 5-8-1, 5-8-1, 5-9, 3-11-0, and then he finally, unfortunately, had to retire from the game. He did have 1 year, I think, where he did get hurt. He only played 9 games, Floyd Little. But here's the deal with Little. He played on teams, and this is what I'm saying. He had to work his way into making the Hall of Fame, and it's really a shame. He led the league in rushing in 71 with 1,100 yards. And when I say 1,100, I'm 1,100 and change. Actually, specifically, 1,133. He averaged 4 yards a carry for that year. He averaged 3.9 in his career. Not bad, not great, but let's take it in context. The overall record of the teams he played for compiled a 47-73 record with 6 ties. Basically, they were at like 333 winning percentage, maybe about 350 winning percentage. And even if you eliminated the last year, which was the worst year that he played for a Bronco team, his career was 44-62-6. So there's still 18 games under 500. You're not going to, one, get a lot of opportunities to really rise and be shown nationally. In fact, I can recall, and I guess this is why I did like the Broncos so much, you never got to see them on TV. When Elway came aboard, and it's funny, I never liked the Elway Broncos. Don't ask me why. I guess because he was kind of like the thing that, great player. How do I say this? He's the computer printout player and was a great player, but you're going to see this when I talk about the NFL draft. So often, can we say Joe Montana and Tom Brady? So often, it's not the computer printout player that's the great player. It's the one that is found in the later rounds that becomes the heart and soul of your team. Who's the winner? And maybe it's because they always have to fight their way to the top. The 5th round guy is not going to get maybe as many chances as the 1st round one, obviously because you don't want to see it as a disaster. If you have to cut the 1st round draft pick, especially if he's your first pick in the draft. That's what the Jets may have avoided by winning some games, is that all that pressure on who are you picking for number 1 is not going to be on their shoulders. But Floyd Little managed to make a number of all-star teams. He ran for over 6,000 yards. And my argument is this. Don't forget, Denver, and this is in context too, Denver was always playing in the same division as Oakland and Kansas City. That's why, in many respects, Denver and maybe San Diego couldn't get to the top because those two teams were really the elite teams of the AFL. Yeah, you had your Jets and you had your New England Patriots and the Buffalo Bills of the early 60s. And actually, in all honesty, the Oakland Raiders stunk in the early 60s. But then, they just build a team. They get the right coach in there, John Madden, and they just take off. And, of course, Hank Stram matriculated that team to the Super Bowl, the great line from Super Bowl against the 1970 against the Minnesota Vikings, Super Bowl IV. Way to matriculate that ball down the field, as Hank Stram would say. And that game was played in the mud, by the way. Great game that way. But those two teams were dynasty-like. I mean, let's face it. They both won a Super Bowl. They both appeared in the first 2 Super Bowls. Oakland would take a little bit longer to win a Super Bowl than Kansas City. But it's tough to overcome those 2 guys, especially if those are 4 of your meetings in a 14-game season. I'm not using it as an excuse. I'm just putting this in context. And the Broncos, one thing, they never really had a good quarterback, and they had a plethora of coaches, so there was no stability there. They were trying to change it. One thing I didn't realize when I was doing a little research on Floyd Little today was the fact that he's called or nicknamed the franchise, even though here in the Northeast, especially in the metropolitan area. I think there's only one guy that we know as the franchise, and that's Tom Seaver. So that's kind of a stretch for us New York, New Jersey fans. But Floyd Little was seen as the franchise, nicknamed that because Denver at one point was thinking about moving to Chicago. I think it might have been Philadelphia. I'm not sure. But him coming into the scene in Denver, it secured their football field Mile High, and then the rest was history for really that team in Colorado. But here's the other thing I wanted to tell you. The interesting thing about that draft, and this, I just did some research on it, so this is a first. There are actually 4 players in that draft out of the top 8 picks that came from the same team. So you're talking about the 66 team and 67. They were all from Michigan State. They were George Webster, who I remember as a kid, number 90 with the Houston Oilers, the guy I liked. They were Bubba Smith of the Baltimore Colts, Michigan State. And they were also Gene Washington. This Gene Washington, who played for the Minnesota Vikings. And then there was another player by the name of Clint Jones. And there's Clint. And he's high hurdling there. But that's Clint Jones. The amazing thing about that draft, yeah, Little was a first-round pick, but it's the only time in the history, and I went all the way back to the 40s and then farther on. I even checked the AFC, the All-American Football Conference, and the old AFL. There have been a number of teams, and I'll pick this up next week when I talk a little bit more about this, about the drafts and all the rest of it. But it was the only year in which 4 players from the same squad were picked in the top 8. Not even talking about the top 10. There are other teams that had 3 chosen in the top 10 in the early 50s, like Notre Dame. And then later on, Oklahoma had 3 players chosen in the top 10, but never 4 in the top 8. That's incredible. Webster, Bubba Smith, Clint Jones, and Gene Washington. Just an incredible squad, that 66 Michigan State team. Has not happened before that year nor after. An incredible little stat that I got just by doing a little review of the great Floyd Little. This is Will O'Toole. Thank you again for joining me for another Park Ridge Sports History episode.